Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Claude Hendrickson here, and I've got Tom. You can introduce yourself.
And I'm Tom. I'm the Chief Executive of the National Community Land Trust Network.
Okay, right. What we're going to do here then, since there's nobody going to be introducing us, because I thought it was going to be done different, I'm going to share my screen now, and we're going to do a setting the scene video. I'm going to show you a 6-minute video, and then after that I will do my introduction and go through my sheets. So where is it now? Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Right, I've lost you, Tom. Okay, sharing screen.
My name's Randolph Martin. Supposed to be in a house a month. We're a bit behind. There's still a fair bit for us to do. It's just that we're worried about getting the shelter before the winter. I don't know. I reckon we'll still get them up for October, end of October. Yeah, I reckon so. 12 of us are building our own houses. Most of us live in substandard houses or homes that are not our own. We've been trying to get the outside work done by December. The project was a vision of one local man, Claude Hendrickson.
It was all cobbled streets. It was atrocious. And this is what really drives me. In the mid-80s, we had streets and streets of houses blocked up, empty, boarded up, doing nothing, whilst people were living 3 to a bedroom, 4 to a bedroom. Again, these are things that inspired us to get up and do the self-build. You're talking in maybe 20 houses, you're talking at least 8, 9 of them, not like this. And turn the camera. You know, you talk about 8, 9 of them in disrepair like this. This was the tendency in nearly every single street within Chaptertown.
Last year, winter, this started happening. This is my flat, a typical example of the housing around the area. And I can't live here anymore. It's not as bad now, but wait till the winter sets in again. Houses are going to drop down.
There's Michael Bennett, one of the bricklayers for Frontline Self-Build. Today, Saturday, what we've decided to come in today and actually finish the gable end so that we're all ready, prepared for Monday morning. To me, Frontline is my life. We're doing a food for the community, not just in building houses, but to teach the young generation out there, if they want something in life, they can actually get that with hard work.
This is upstairs. All the stunning. The door liners are in position. This will be the bathroom. And a lot of people have come in and says it's a bit small, but I mean, as far as we're concerned, it's there's, you know, And then Mike, I brought all my kids up here and they're arguing about the bedrooms. I think I've got to sleep downstairs now. But I don't mind. It's mine. My house. I built it. The weather's not been too kind to us, but we still managed to just keep it. I reckon I'm still do it. And on the gas. The other day it was raining, and I went to it raining cats and dogs. And this guy was in the gutter. I said, Mackie, tea time. And I said, Shorty, after the rain, let's get this trench dug. You know, that's the kind of attitude I like to hear. Comic Relief has given us the money to pay for Graham Gill. He's our site supervisor. At this moment in time, we've been on site 6 months. We've put the equivalent of 10 houses, which really, realistically speaking, for a self-build, it's better than any self-build that's ever gone before it. No other self-build has managed to do it as quick as this, or to the standard that this one's been done either. This is the largest group that I know of within Chapeltown region, 12 men working together. And I think the experience that we gain from this will help them to stay together, to form a cooperative, and tender for work within the community.
Some of the people that are out of work right now, in a couple of years, we could be employing them ourselves and helping to solve the housing problem that we have in our community. We're not saying self-help can solve it, or we're not saying Frontline can solve the whole of it, but we're saying Frontline is definitely taking a step in the right direction.
My name is Darcy Thomas. My dad knew Thomas as Thomas.
The youths out there, they don't really have much really to look forward to. Because I know them. Now it's our turn to show our generation what they can really do if they put their mind to it.
Okay, thank you for that. I am going to share my screen again. I just need to get this up, get this there, get this up, share. There you go. Can you see that? Can everybody see that? Can you see that, Tom? Because I can't see anybody.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
You can see that, Tom?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, go for it.
1 minute.
My name's Claude of Hendrickson.
Oh, no.
An advocate, a voice of reason, a voice for the young people, a voice of experience.
Sorry about this. I have to stop sharing.
My mother came to England in
I have
1958.
to.
I was born in 1960.
One minute.
2 years old, and it was a very hard start.
I am trying to find out
This is the
where
school that I went to at 5 years old.
gone.
The names we would be.
Right, there we go. There we go. Can you still see that, Tom? Can you see that, Tom?
No, not now.
Okay. I'm just.
Yep, there we go.
Okay.
We're with you.
Okay, sorry about that. Whenever you take a video off of YouTube, it seems to just go to the next one. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks to Ronnie Mead for inviting me along with, and Tom for the invitation to come with Tom from Community Land Trust. My name's Claude Hendrickson. I'm based in Chapeltown in Leeds. And this afternoon, we're here to talk about how we can stimulate more Black led housing projects in the UK, not just in the North, but in the UK. I am an Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Associate to Leeds Community Homes, which was funded under the Cohesive Communities by Tom's organisation, the National Community Land Trust Network. So thanks to Tom for that. A little bit about me, because I think it is important listening to some of the speakers this morning that people understand some of the journeys that we have to take as Black people to kind of prove ourselves as we move through the system. So I've been active in the Chapeltown community over 30 years. I was involved in the first race riots of 1975 as a 15-year-old young child. For the Londoners, Darcus Howe was my mentor. I met Darcus Howe in 1975 as a young 15-year-old when we had our riots. In that 30 years I have done, like you've just seen, I initiated the Frontline Self-Build Project, which was a group of unemployed Black men to build their own houses, gain employment, a sense of respect, get respect from their peers. I've also been the co-founder and director of the Chapeltown Young People's Club, which was giving the young people of Chapeltown a voice to shape the future services delivered to them. I was also involved in the first internet cafe opening in Leeds, in the Chapeltown area, which was back in 2000, which was our Millennium Project, again with the Chapeltown Young People's Club. I'm a Black men's health champion. I go out promoting men's health, trying to raise the issue with men and health. I have done research across 3 cities in Yorkshire, Leeds, Bradford and Huddersfield, looking at education, training and employment, health and well-being and the inequalities around them. I've also been involved with an organisation that I know is speaking tomorrow called BTEG as one of their Black male role models, and I was trying to set up a Yorkshire role model project, and I'm still something dear to my heart, which goes into school speaking to young boys. Over the past 30 years, I've worked face-to-face with individuals from all walks of life and backgrounds with diverse abilities, have produced consistent outcomes from my work and for my clients. I think that's important because at the end of the day, sometimes some of the things we do within our community, and when you live and work in your community, it's different to being parachuted into that community. So the history of what has happened stays within that community. And sometimes when we have people parachute into our communities, the history doesn't remain. So I'm here to kind of talk of the history of Chapeltown. My journey with community-led housing, the first part, and I'm watching the time, Tom, I'm not going to cut into your time. Frontline was a project that was set up, number one, because back in the late 80s, early 90s, it was said that Black men did not want to work, we were unemployable, they wanted to do negative things. So I wanted to prove that a group of Black men working together could achieve something, and not just building houses, but actually building a better future for themselves and setting an example for young men and other members of the community coming up. So we set out to build these houses, and believe you me, it was not an easy task. From we started out to actually delivering, it was 6 years of jumping over hurdles. You know, everybody's telling us, every organization telling us that we could not do it, that they had no evidence a group of Black men working together could achieve anything. So 25 years on, the houses there, you can see in the bottom picture, 25 years on, the houses are still there, still pristine, 92,000 bricks, 52,000 blocks, 12 semi-detached houses, 2-bedroomed houses. We even renamed the street Frontline Close, and that name came about because the guys were off of the front line. I went on, and firstly, I'll say I was inspired by another Black project which happened in St. Paul's in Bristol in the early 80s. A group of men down there built a block of 12 flats. So that was my inspiration. I then became a member of the Community Self-Build Agency, which has completed something like 178 self-build projects across the UK, some 1,200 units. And out of that 778 projects, maybe 3% to 5% of the projects were projects led by Black people. And within the community-led housing sector, you will find in Liverpool, history will teach you that there was a Black project in Liverpool. There's been Black projects many years ago in Birmingham. There's been Black projects in London. There's been Black projects obviously in Leeds, but we still only make up less than 5% of the projects that have happened nationally. And Tom will give you some more stats, I hope, about the Community Land Trust and the number of Black-led organizations they have under their umbrella. In 2010, I met an interesting man, Major Ken Hames, who's an ex-SAS officer. And what we found out was that 60 to 70% of all homeless men living on the street were actually ex-veterans, ex-military people. So we set about running a number of projects in Bristol for veterans, a really good charity. We must have done at least 12, 13 projects in Bristol. And Bristol for me is the home of community self-build. In 2012, to move on, I became the Northern Director of the Community Self-Build Agency in a voluntary capacity, which gave me the license to go forward and promote self-build in the north of the UK, because historically, I would say something like 60 to 70% of self-build was being done in the south of the UK, not as much in the north, even though I do know there are projects in the north, but nowhere near as many as down in and around London and down in that region. In 2015, I was commissioned by Leeds City Council to produce a 10-year strategy into self-build and community-led housing, which I produced. It's sitting on their shelves now. And what we wanted to look into was wanting to prove that the community-led housing could contribute to the crisis that we have in the housing sector. We can't solve it, but we can contribute. So I did that report, whistle stop. In Leeds, after Frontline set up, and this is kind of important for me, Frontline was set up in 1988. But since then, in 1989, we had a project set up called Latch, led by two white guys that came from Oxford University and Cambridge and came to live in Leeds. They set up Latch. Another white group set up Canopy. Another white group set up Gypsel. Another white group set up Lilac. Chaco is the latest project that is happening in Leeds, which was set up by another white group, but they have elected a Black chair. The reason I've shown you this, and this is just Leeds, this is not the whole sector, this is Leeds. Now in Leeds, I tried to work with every one of these organizations. They all turned me away. Even though Frontline had kick-started the community-led sector in Leeds, none of the white organizations wanted to work with me, which was very demoralizing. But it didn't stop me. I went on, like I showed you before, I went on and did stuff with young people. So I've been in and around the community-led sector for 25 years. And I will say that, and you know, Tom knows I'm honest about this, it is very predominantly white-led for white people. That doesn't mean there haven't been small numbers of projects for black people, or black people have not been involved in projects, but it must be less than 5% of the overall projects that have happened nationally. Tom may serve to differ from me. In 2019, I came back to the community-led sector in Leeds. I joined and partnered up with Leeds Community Homes, originally as their BAME and LGBT advisor, which has now become the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Associate. In January 2020, I became the first black male credited community-led advisor in the UK. So they created an accreditation. I went on the accreditation funded by a bit of money from National Community Land Trust and Leeds Community Homes, became the first black male. My role is to get more black and ethnic minority groups involved in the community-led sector, and that is my intention. And these were the main ethoses of me getting involved. The most important goal was to encourage more minority groups to become involved in the sector, not only just being members of projects, but actually leading that project, just the same way I did with Frontline. And this is not just about building new homes. There's a massive number of houses out there to be refurbished. I'm not only interested in just creating homes, but creating employment and enterprise. Because when you build homes, you need to maintain them. So there's opportunities for our young people to learn trades. In construction, I think construction is probably one of the biggest institutions where color a lot of the time doesn't matter. If you're a good tradesman, you will get work. And I think, you know, we need to be pushing more of our young people, because everybody can't be academic, everybody can't work in a call center. And I would put this out to you: how often have you looked for a plumber, a joiner, a painter and decorator, you know, a landscape gardener? You know, they're hard to find. So that industry needs more. To develop a strategy, one of the things that's come out of my work is looking at homelessness and looking at how we can get more homeless people involved in the community-led sector. Also looking at new migrating and undocumented and documented people in the system, to see how we can get them involved in the sector. This by, right now I'm working with Leeds Migration Partnership in Leeds. I'm also working with RETAS, which is an organization. I'm having to move quick because my time's running out. Okay, what has come out of my work with the community-led sector in the last year is me and a brother called Henry Baptiste from Pathways Solutions in Nottingham, whom we met up on the accreditation and training. We're heading up some research into Black people and community-led sector. Research objectives, I'm going to have to rush this because I know our time's short because we started late. To examine structural barriers for minority-led organizations getting involved in the sector, review organizational approaches to enable communities to get more involved. This will explore existing policies as well as proposed changes in policy and the strategy resulting from increased urgency, especially after what's happened with COVID. I think COVID has served as a as it's slow motion in time for people to really look at the inequalities that have been happening in the system, and Black Lives Matters only came along to build on them. To survey government offices, local authorities, intermediary funders, organizations in the community-led sector, to review the take-up of community-led housing models by Black and ethnic minority communities. If they're not taking them up, why are they not taking them up? To identify barriers and opportunities for transformation. I think to the community-led sector, there is a lot of opportunities if they can engage and empower Black communities. I think that can be another string to the bow of the community-led sector. To deliver a report on how the sector operates, so to produce evidence and give recommendations on how it can be changed. And I don't want this to be another report just like the disparities report. I mean, real tangible changes to the sector. To highlight good practices and develop case studies, because the community-led housing sector does have some good practices and some good examples, and how can we case study them and take them forward. To produce a series of recommendations and an action plan. To scope future funding for the sector, to be involved in getting more people to do community-led housing projects and become community land trusts. Also to help develop an equality, diversity and training kit for the for the sector, no matter whether you're in a rural part of the country or you're in an urban part. All organizations should have an EDI policy. The 9 stages, and I'm flashing through this: scoping, policy and strategy review, practical survey, gap and SWOT analysis, recommendations and consultation, action planning, research, report and action planning, and follow up with, hopefully we can get the funding. What I will say about this is we are looking, as we speak, we are looking to raise funding for this research. I would say, and I will say that Tom and his team have put up some finance. Power to Change has put up a little bit of finance for this research, but we are looking for funding and funding bodies to support this work. So if there's any of you out there that are funders, I would love to get in touch with you and see how you can support this work. Thank you for that. I will take questions at the end because I want to hand you over to Tom now, who's been sat there quite neatly and not saying anything. Tom, your turn. Can't hear you, Tom.
There we go. Thank you, Claude. So I noticed already we've had a comment from Greg in the chat about taking over community building. So Claude's talked a lot about housing. I'm going to talk a bit about housing as well, and also other things that community land trusts can do, like community buildings. And I guess one of the reasons we've focused a bit on housing is, I was chatting to Claude about this yesterday, that everybody lives in a home, and if there's a kind of asset that the community can own that would have the biggest and most fundamental impact on people in this country, it's housing. So it's a good kind of interesting place to start. But a lot of the principles we're talking about, you could apply to other sorts of buildings, other kinds of assets as well. So the Community Land Trust Network, we're a charity. We were set up about 10 years ago. We're also a membership body for community land trusts. They're up and down the country. And our focus is on really trying to create the conditions for this to be much more accessible and not quite so difficult. So communities all over the country, every community can take advantage of this approach to take control and ownership of assets like housing, so they can make themselves more of a sustainable community and address some of the issues that they face. I thought I'd just show this. I mentioned this to Claude yesterday. So we've done some research on where community land trusts are. And in every region of the country, apart from the east of England, community land trusts, the blue dots on this chart, are in more deprived parts of the region than the regional average. So even in the Yorkshire and Humber where Claude is, so the average is kind of around the middle there, there's a green dot and the blue dot on the left. Across Yorkshire and the Humber, community land trusts are in more deprived parts of Yorkshire and Humber than the average in that area. So they've tended to focus in places with deprivation and also places with big problems with affordable housing. That's, and I say concentrate there, I mean that's where people have started them, because no one's telling anyone to start a CLT, they're just started by people in their communities. The first community land trust is actually in America. There's a really great video called The Arc of Justice, which is where I got the title for this presentation from, which you can sadly have to buy the DVD, I think. But it's a really interesting story about a community of black farmers in Georgia, in the southern states, who were constantly harassed by racist county and state officials and were struggling to keep their farms going. And they decided they through the civil rights movement and community organizing in 1969, they formed a new kind of a cooperative, which they call a community land trust, to take ownership of all of their land and farm it. And then they still had they've had an interesting long story. So in the 80s, they eventually collapsed because they had a series of droughts and they couldn't get loans, and they successfully eventually sued the government for racial discrimination and not giving them finance, and were able to re-establish themselves and buy back some of their land. So it's kind of an ongoing story in the US of racial injustice. But the community land trust bit of it was basically this idea they had that they didn't just want to own the farmers as individual sort of farm owners, and they didn't just want to own it between themselves as farmers as a cooperative traditionally, but they wanted it to be something which everybody who lived in the community had a stake in, to share the benefits of ownership and to bring more justice to the community as a whole. So the idea of the community land trust is anyone who lived and worked in the area could join it, they all jointly owned it, and that community land trust had to use that land for the benefit of the whole local community. So how does it create jobs and prosperity and wealth for that local community? And since then, it's spread all across the United States. It's spread to Puerto Rico, to Belgium. There's a really interesting book all about the kind of global spread of the community land trust movement, and in the UK as well. And in England, it looks quite different. So this is probably the most typical kind of community land trust, smallish rural housing developments in villages where the village controls the development and decides what kind of affordable housing they need. And it's great, it's kind of providing a lot of affordable housing that's genuinely suited to the local area and is controlled and owned by the people in that village. Or it's a bit more ambitious, it's new garden villages. So big, this is a 500 home scheme in Cambridgeshire, big developments, again, controlled and owned by local people. Or it's taking over existing things. So this is a council estate in Westminster that was part of, or was threatened with demolition back in the 80s by the Conservative Council that was trying to basically gerrymander the political boundaries and clear people out of some wards. So they wanted to kick all the council housing out of this particular bit of Westminster. And eventually, a long campaign, the community took ownership of their estate and they now manage it as a CLT. And they've been building new homes here, as well as a community centre, a youth centre and various other facilities. So really ambitious, take control of and ownership of all of your housing and all of your facilities and then manage them yourselves. It's more recently kind of new citizens campaigns starting up in this case, this is in Mile End, very diverse area, campaigning to have similar level of control over the regeneration of a big site that was originally a workhouse, then was a mental health hospital that was decommissioned. It's called St Clement's, and London citizens and a community land trust forming to say, we want to take this site forward, we want to be in control of it and not just have it done unto us, because we see regeneration happening in London as a process that is prioritising the needs of the better off, and also in a lot of parts of London leading to forms of racial discrimination because of the average incomes of people in the area, by and large, black and minority ethnic people unable to afford the homes, and so being cleared out or having to leave the area for wealthier white residents. So, and they've succeeded in this, and they've done this development, they've got others coming around London. They're not just doing housing, so they own community shops, and this is one in Somerset where they also led the response to COVID by making sure they were delivering food parcels to people in the local area. There's one in Cambridgeshire that is it's it's built some housing and it's now retrofitting a district heating system to all the homes. So all the people who basically currently have oil heating, they're going to take them all off of oil and put them onto a renewable energy system. And there's one in Shropshire that is just buying farmland and is focused on conservation. So community land trusts are doing all sorts of different things around this idea of taking land into community ownership and then making it work for the community. But mostly, they're pretty white, a bit like my screen, as Claude says. And there are examples like the one in Mile End where you've got a more diverse group of people involved, but the people who you would hear speaking about the project and leading it are mostly white. And although they are overrepresented in deprived areas, again, often the people who lead those projects or the people who kind of end up being the face of the sector are quite white and middle class. So there's a problem for us and a kind of an opportunity to say, well, this model came from the civil rights movement in the US. Let's make it a stronger part of racial equity in the UK. And there's every reason why we should. So some examples, Community Land Scotland, our sister body for Scotland, they did some really interesting research recently on the links between slavery and land ownership. And one of the most amazing statistics was that around a third of the West Highlands and islands in Scotland were bought, and those big estates, they were bought by people with slavery profits. And the sort of pattern of land ownership in Scotland and across England is often drenched in slavery. That's why people own the land, because they have made money from slavery. We know now, in relation to things like COVID, that Black and minority ethnic people are more likely to be homeless, overcrowded, fuel poor, have all these housing problems, and they're all linked to the high death rates in COVID. So it's a key part of the kind of economic injustice that people face. And there have also been not just housing, but other things that do with ownership of land, homes, business premises. So in former life, I worked at the Greater London Authority, and we looked at small businesses being cleared out in areas where, places like Brixton, where people have created businesses, made the place a success, they've generated more commercial investment into the area, and then the landlords go, great, we'll stick up the rents, we'll regenerate this and make it more expensive because we can charge higher rents now that this is a really exciting place. And suddenly all those businesses in a place like Brixton, which of course would mostly be have been founded by black people, were being kicked out and forced out because they couldn't afford those rents, because they were just running in a say an M&T garage or a market stall, all sorts of businesses that couldn't afford them. This is all because they don't own the land. And if you don't own the land, you can't build wealth in your community, because the person who does own the land is going to take that wealth. So the Community Land Trust, the idea is to achieve racial justice and other forms of justice through ownership of the land. The model is the community, anyone living or working in the local area can join and they have an equal vote. Land, you're taking that land out of the market. And trust, you're not using it, you're holding it in trust for the community and using it for the long-term well-being of the community, whatever that involves. Why is this not more common, and how do you make this happen? So these are the three key barriers. It's how do you get access to land or a building, the finance to make it happen, the expertise to help you figure out how to do it, and also a widespread culture of paternalism in the UK, because the kind of power of community just isn't really recognised in local government, in business, even in many of our communities. We basically look to someone else to sort things out for us. Like, well, the council's got to fix that, or the government's got to fix that, or house builders will build the homes we need. And actually tackling that culture of paternalism and seeing examples like Claude was describing with Frontline, the power of what people can do themselves. And then underlying all of this is structural racism, which makes all of that much harder if you're coming from a background where you are black or minority ethnic, and then especially also if that intersects with being low income and other kinds of issues. It's harder to get access to the land and finance. Funders often, there's well-documented problems with people getting access to funding if you're coming from a black or minority ethnic background, and the culture of paternalism can be that much worse as well. But you can do it, and Claude's done it, there are projects that have done it, and we're dedicated to making this more possible. And we could have a bit of discussion in the comments about this. I should point to some resources, but broadly speaking, your best chance of getting a land or a building is either a public body, like a council that has something that's vacant, that's not being used or that's being underused, and you can make a pitch to them as to how you could use it better, or a sympathetic private owner. If you're just going to trade in the market for these assets, you need to be in a place that's either not very competitive So you're not going to necessarily be bidding against people, or you have a really strong business and you can make a commercial offer for that land or that building. And that's obviously hard if you're starting out. Finance, there are lots of sources of grant funding, loan options, banks, all the rest of it. And the basic thing it comes back to is, do you have a sustainable business plan? And if you don't, is someone going to give you a grant to fill the gap? So that's always the hard thing with things like community centres, is where's your income going to come from running that community centre to pay back the loan for having bought the property, if you need that, and the upkeep of it and so on. And the interesting thing with housing is that it's a pretty tried and tested business model. People pay their rents or they buy the house off you, and you can kind of, there's grant from government for funding affordable housing to make up the difference. So there are sources of finance. I don't want to make it sound easy, because this stuff can often be a bit of a challenge, but there is quite a bit out there. And then expertise, what we've been doing is building up a network of organisations across the country, which we call enabler hubs, with access to trained advisors like Claude, who can give you, they can provide you with the expertise. They'll help you to make it happen. To tackle the culture of paternalism, it comes back to good old community organising and building yourself up in the local community into an organisation that has lots of members, that can demonstrate it's got the skills and the capabilities to make things happen, and that puts political pressure on those who are holding you back. And whether that, and so in the case of, I gave the example of the former workhouse in Mile End, that was many years of community organising to eventually get that site off the Mayor of London and into community hands. And on structural racism, just the thing then, the inspiration we take from our friends in America is take back control, take ownership. If you don't own it, you're not in control of it. And that's what is ultimately powerful about this model. It's taking ownership, not just looking to run services and something that someone else owns. And if you want to do it, there's this network I mentioned of enabler hubs. There's Leeds Community Homes in the heart of England, where Claude is. Sorry to everyone in Sheffield, calling it Leeds the heart of England. There's a website, Community Led Homes, where we've got stacks of information resources. You can find information on our website as well. And then there are similar organisations to ours that do other sorts of assets. So there's like the Plunkett Foundation, which focuses on rural businesses and pubs and shops and things like that. And there's Locality, which has a network of community organisations running things like community centres. So there are lots of other organisations out there in the sector here that can help you. So I hope that's been helpful. I'll stop sharing my screen, and Claude's put his email address in. There you go. So you can always go to Claude, and he will he's going to help everyone. So this is a webinar format. So if you want to ask any questions or make any comments at this point, I think you can stick it in the chat box or the Q&A. Maybe the chat is easiest to keep it in one place. Love to hear from you, maybe more bit from Greg, for example, about what you're looking to do, taking over community building.
Yeah. And I would add to what Tom has said, that even if you don't have a question, I've got a couple of questions that we'll put in before the meeting that I'm going to come to. But all councils now have a legal obligation to, in principle, have a self-build register, so that you can get in touch with your local council and get on their website and get your name on their right to build website register, so that they can know the interest. And some of the things that have come out when Tom's been speaking was when he spoke about Brixton and the gentrification of Brixton. If we look across the UK, every single Black community, whether it's Chapel Town, whether it's Handsworth, whether it's Radford in Nottingham, whether it's Highfields in Leicester, whether it's Ladbroke Grove in London, whether it's Lewisham, all of these areas have been and are being gentrified right now. And what I liked about what Tom says is that if you don't own it, if you don't own the land, you don't have no power. You know, even if you own the house on the land, you still don't have the power. I've got a couple of questions here, Tom. One says, I would like to know how to secure a community hall for a local community. For instance, I have seen other communities securing halls. They are empty buildings, but hard to know where and who to contact. That's one question. I'm interested in how to get property like a house, as I would like to start a refuge. And the final one is, I'm really interested in this model of development, but do I need to have networks where I live? And would I want to move to another part of the UK to develop a project? How realistic am I being? So there's 3 questions there. You want to take them, or I can take them?
Why don't you have a first shot and then I'll
Sorry?
follow up. Why don't you have a first shot at it and I'll follow up?
How did I know you was going to say that? What I would say to the first question, how can you secure a community hall? What I would say is, if you identify a building, or what I would say is, check out whether you've got one of the hubs in your area. They can give you advice. So if you can get, one of the local hubs, that would be for me the first part of call, and then take some advice from them, and then look at setting up your group and your committee. You can have interest in how to get property like a house for, as I would like to start a refuge. Tom?
Yeah. I suppose I think with particularly we're trying to do something like a refuge or a project like that, then as Claude said, your hub is a good place to start, because it's figuring out, well, that they could help you explore the general questions of where you might be able to acquire a property, help you with the business plan for it. And then I guess if you're doing something specialist like a refuge, and I'm not sure what sort of refuge it would be, is it a women's refuge or so on, is then obviously there are specialist charities that's in those sectors that could also give you advice. And I guess wanting to talk to other people who've done similar things, because then you'd have particular needs, wouldn't you? You'd want to be thinking about where that building is located, how secure it can be, the kind of the suitability of the rooms and all the rest of it.
Okay, okay, we've got Edward Gordon with a raised hand. I don't know how we get the raised hands people to come in. Is there somebody from Runnymede that can let Edward speak?
I've just there's a thing that says allowed to talk,
All
so
right,
we've got 20 minutes before we need to finish up. But Edward, have you got?
Oh, I think you just said unmute. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes. So, wow, not much time. So I just wanted to say, yeah, all of what the two of you are saying, Claude and Tom, really concur, especially because I'm based in London, based in Brixton, in fact.
Okay.
And I'm familiar with a couple of CLTs around this area. And the last, well, I think it was the last slide that Tom showed, the finance and expertise, I can sort of see the way through on those. But it's the access to land, and as you said, the paternalism that's of the most concern. So absolutely, CLTs around this area. The CLTs definitely a good way through. However, and the last urban areas, I mean, Tom showed the finance and the expertise. I can sort of see those, but it's the access to paternalism that's of the most concern. So that definitely seemed to be the solution, because we're all gentrification. It really seems to be the kind of good way through. However, particularly in,
I'm just going to mute Edward, sorry, because I think we got the gist, and then it started repeating the audio for some reason. There's some problem with the connection. But so Ed was saying that getting the expertise and the finance he could see, but he was wondering about the land. And being in Brixton was a really illustrative example, because there was a community land trust called Brixton Green CLT that went through a long process with Lambeth Council and then was eventually excluded from the project by the council. So there's no easy answer where that cultural paternalism kicks in, and that in that case that council decides it doesn't want the community to have any control. and in very expensive places with scarce land like London, it is very hard for communities to get access to land. But there are starting to be more examples of that happening around London, including from more councils that are starting to be a bit less paternalistic and to see the benefits of community power, and then the kind of effectiveness of your community organising, and obviously them can play a part in making a strong case for it. But ultimately, it remains the case that communities can be fairly powerless. But we're hoping that this is growing, and so hopefully everybody will be able to re-engage with it at some point and bring one forward in Brixton. I think that's all we've got time for. Runnymede have said we've run out of time.
Yeah. They've sent me a flap as well to say that we've got to leave. We've got to be out of here for 4 o'clock, even though we started late. But I'd like to thank everybody that took the time to attend today. Thank you, Tom, for the invitation. Thank Runnymede for the invitation. And thank you all who've put questions in the chat and put questions on the what's over. Thank you very much, Tom.
Yeah, thanks to Claude, and thanks to everyone else for attending. Get in touch with us if you want to know more. Cheers.
Thank you.